All right, thanking God again for progress, his insight, and God willing, the way that his insight practically improves our lives. Let's call 1 Corinthians chapter 4 self-aware, continuing on with that theme that we had in the last chapter that really fits within the larger theme that we had going back to chapter 1 of remembering their calling, understanding that it seems that a lot of the Corinthians, if not all of them, came from humble beginnings, but in finding success, they have forgotten where they came from, and it is affecting the way in which they are viewing not only themselves, but the people around them, not the least of which that being Paul, or not the least of which is Paul. And in this chapter, he actually turns to what he seems to have, I don't know, understood as the Corinthians actually beginning to look down on him. And so continuing on with that theme of better than, it seems that they not only think they're better than one another, they think they're better than Paul. And just in case that is the case, he's dealing with that in this chapter. That seems to break down in 4 sections where it's not absolutely clear that he's gotten word that that is the case, but in the first 5 verses, he's going to say in verse 3, it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or any human court. Understanding that the irony is, in terms of biblical judgment, none of us are fully equipped to judge very much at all, if anything. Now, there's a sense of judgment where we are to properly discern what we are seeing. But in terms of issuing the kind of final judgment that God is going to come to render on each and every one of us, he is just going to flat out say that there are certain things that we don't know. And we don't know, not knowing those things, we just lack the ability to render effective judgment. In verse 5, God is going to be the one who brings light to things now hidden and will disclose the purposes of the heart. 2 things necessary to render a fair judgment. And so he's going to say, don't judge things before the time. Not because he's being biased and doesn't want to be judged by them, but we're just not equipped. And that can be difficult to keep in mind. But the more we do, the more we have the self-awareness to understand the limits of our human judgment. And with that, he's going to go on in verses 6 through 7 to make it clear that he's not just talking about his own self-interest in not being judged or condemned by the Corinthians, because as he's already talked about in the first 3 chapters, they are puffed up against one another, or it seems that they're puffed up against one another, and he is writing to make sure that if it is happening, it doesn't get any worse. Understanding that in verses 8 through 13, he is then going to talk about the way in which they have become inflated as to, as we mentioned before, their own accomplishments. And there are going to be 2 problems with each of the things he identifies in those last couple of sections, verses 6 through 7. That section, when they are puffed up against one another, he's going to say, logically, it doesn't make sense because you're being puffed up about your gifts. Gifts. They were given to you. You didn't give yourself the ability to biblically speak in tongues or to have biblical prophecy or to teach in the way that you are able to now as compared to who you were before God gifted you in this special way. And so likewise, if you were freely given these gifts and you know your before and after, you know who you were before God blessed you with this, why are you bragging about stuff that he gave you? Understanding that your gift might be better than theirs, but you all got it free. So anyway, the logic in the competition, there isn't much logic to it. So he's saying basically self-awareness would help you to stop it. Beyond that, when he's talking about them being inflated about their accomplishments, the irony is this. With all of these conversations or musings that they have going on, whether or not they are better than Paul, whether or not they are better than one another, how much they've accomplished or acquired, with all of those musings, when are they actually working? And then what are they actually accomplishing? Which is what he's going to turn to in the last section, verses 14 through 21, where he's going to say that the kingdom of God isn't about gifts and talents and guesswork and chatter. It's basically about power, which is what he's going to say in verse 19, and likewise what he's going to repeat again in verse 20 as he says, the kingdom of God does not consist in talk, but in power, concluding the chapter in verse 21 by saying, what do you wish? Shall I come to you with a rod or with love in a spirit of gentleness? My paraphrase, do we have to deal with a whole lot of drama, or can we just enjoy one another's company? And the whole chapter in some ways reminded me of another illustration I use from time to time, this one being feet, because when I was on the mission field, I noticed how beat up some of the kids' feet were, but they were beat up in a very practical and, to me, a cool way, because the kids have been used to running and playing outside without shoes from the time they were, I'm gonna say, yay high. And so, as an American coming over there with pampered feet, I was really kind of humbled by the way that the kids had tough feet. And I come from a culture where men prize being tough, and my feet were lacking the toughness of even the kids around me. And so, flip that. What seems to be happening here is Paul, when he is talking later on in the second half of that section that runs from verses 8 through 13, he talks about the way in which it seems that some of the folks at Corinth have been conditioned or tempted to look down on him because of his beat up feet. And even if it's not his beat up feet, there are a lot of things that Paul has been through that they just haven't. And a lot of their conversations are a product of the fact that they're simply functioning in privilege and luxury. And instead of being ashamed of the fact that their conversations are evidence of how little they've been doing, they're actually proud about it. And so one of the things that made me think of was the way I was humbled overseas by seeing the feet of even the little kids around me who were tougher in ways that I can only really admire. So with that, that's why we sometimes say, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. May God grant us the self-awareness to recognize the value in the struggles of others.